My name is Caleb. I'm 31, and I make my home in a quiet corner of Tacoma, Washington. The city has its noise, but my neighborhood is all old trees and the distant sound of the port. It's peaceful. I lease a small but comfortable one-bedroom apartment over a bookstore that always smells like paper and rain. My work is as quiet as my life. I'm a digital archivist for the County Historical Society, spending my days with ghosts on microfilm, restoring faded photographs, and organizing forgotten stories. It isn't thrilling, but it's meticulous work that pays my rent and suits my disposition. I've always been a man who prefers listening to talking. I've never been in a serious relationship. I suppose I assumed that part of life would simply materialize when the time was right, but the time never seemed to announce itself. My days were governed by a predictable and comfortable rhythm. Wake at 6, run by the water, work from 8 to 4, and spend my evenings reading or listening to old jazz records. My space was my own, a sanctuary built of silence and order. It was a life carved into a peaceful, if solitary, shape, and I was, for the most part, content with it. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my sister called, and her voice was a frantic whirlwind that tore through my quiet afternoon. Her friend's apartment building had a catastrophic pipe burst, flooding 2 whole floors. This friend, Leah, was basically stranded. She had her work bag, a half-dead phone, and nowhere to go for the night. My sister, knowing I had a spare key to her place an hour away, begged me. Could Leah just stay for one night? Just until she could figure things out in the morning? I hesitated. My apartment was my fortress. I didn't do guests, especially not strangers. But the desperation in my sister's voice was a hook I couldn't shake. I reluctantly agreed. An hour later, a knock came at my door. When I opened it, she was standing there, looking smaller than I'd imagined. Leah. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy knot, a few strands stuck to her forehead from the damp air. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, and her eyes, a startling shade of green, were wide with exhaustion and apology. She clutched the strap of a worn leather satchel like a lifeline. She was trying so hard to be unobtrusive, to take up as little space as possible, but her presence filled the quiet of my apartment instantly. The plan was for a single night. One night, and then she would sort out a hotel or a friend closer to her work. But the next morning, a call from her landlord shattered that plan. The damage was extensive. They were talking at least a week, maybe more, before her unit was habitable again. I watched her face crumble as she listened on the phone, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She hung up and stared at the wall, looking utterly lost. My internal monologue was a siren of panic. A week? A stranger in my meticulously ordered space for a whole week? But looking at her, at the genuine despair in her eyes, I couldn't bring myself to voice my own discomfort. I couldn't just put her out on the street. That evening, after a mostly silent dinner of takeout pizza, we had to address the unspoken problem. My apartment had 1 bedroom, 1 bed. The couch was a stylish but unforgiving block of modern design, not meant for sleeping. She immediately started gathering the decorative pillows. "It's totally fine," she insisted, her voice tight with a forced cheerfulness. "I can make it work. You take the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." She was already trying to arrange a makeshift pallet, refusing to even look at me, as if my own bed was a sacred space she wouldn't dare impose upon. I stood there for a long moment, watching her. The thought of this exhausted woman sleeping on my hardwood floor because of my own awkwardness felt deeply wrong. I let out a slow breath. I replied, "The bed fits too." She froze, her hands still on a pillow, and finally looked up at me. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. I quickly added, trying to sound as practical and unthreatening as possible, "Just stay on your side." Her posture relaxed just a fraction, a small, hesitant nod, her only reply. That night, lying stiffly on the far left edge of my own mattress, the silence in the room was different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged, filled with the sound of another person's breathing just a few feet away. I was acutely aware of every rustle of the sheets, every soft sigh. My sanctuary had been breached, and I had no idea how I was going to survive a week of this strange, unnerving intimacy. The first few days after that awkward agreement were a masterclass in avoidance. We moved around each other in the small apartment like choreographed dancers trying not to touch. I'd get up early to run, and when I got back, she'd already be showered and getting ready for work in the bathroom. I'd leave for my office, and she'd leave for hers. A quiet, "have a good day," exchanged in the hallway. Our evenings were spent with a careful buffer of space between us, me at my desk, her on the couch with a book. But slowly, impossibly, the silence began to feel less like a wall and more like a shared space. It started with coffee. On the third morning, I made a full pot instead of my usual single cup, and left a mug out for her on the counter. When I came home that evening, I found she had washed my dishes from the morning and wiped down the entire kitchen. They were small, unspoken gestures of truce, acknowledgments that we were in this strange situation together. Slowly, conversation started to trickle into the quiet. One evening, I saw her looking at a framed photo on my bookshelf. "Is this your family?" she asked. I walked over. "My parents and my sister, a few years back." She smiled faintly. "You have your mum's eyes." It was a simple observation, but it felt like she was seeing a piece of me, not just the quiet man whose apartment she'd invaded. I learned she was a third-grade teacher at a school across town. I learned she had a daughter, a 7-year-old named Chloe, who was staying with her father for the month, a pre-arranged visit that had, by some grim coincidence, served her from the apartment flood. She spoke about Chloe with a light in her eyes that transformed her entire face, a fierce, tender love that was palpable. "She's obsessed with astrophysics right now," Leah told me one night, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "She wants to be the first person to discover a friendly alien civilization, and she hates broccoli with a passion that could fuel a rocket ship." I found myself looking forward to her stories. They were little windows into a life so different from my own, a life filled with the vibrant chaos of a child and the challenges of single motherhood. I learned about her ex-husband, not in a single dramatic story, but in brief, telling phrases. The way her voice would tighten when she mentioned him, the flicker of old hurt in her eyes. She never bad-mouthed him. Not really. But I could read between the lines. He was a source of complication, a past she was still navigating. I didn't push. I wasn't that kind of person. But I listened. I became a quiet repository for the small details of her day. A funny thing a student said. A frustration with her insurance company. Her relief that Chloe was having fun with her dad. And the more I listened, the more my apartment began to feel less like my sanctuary, and more like a shared haven. The scent of her shampoo lingered in the bathroom, her favorite tea was now in my cupboard, and the sound of her soft laughter while on the phone with her daughter became a welcome part of my evening. I was surprised to find that I didn't mind. In fact, a part of me was starting to dread the day the landlord would call to say her apartment was ready. One Friday, things felt different. The repairs were almost done. She'd likely be leaving by Sunday. We'd ordered Thai food and were eating on the living room floor, the television off for once. She'd had a difficult call with her ex earlier, and a shadow still lingered behind her eyes. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clinking of our forks. Then she set her plate aside and looked at me, her gaze direct and searching. "You know," she said quietly, "you're not at all what I expected." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" She shrugged, a small, self-deprecating smile playing on her lips. I don't know. My sister described you as serious and a little solitary. I think I was picturing a grumpy hermit. I chuckled, the sound genuine. I'm not grumpy, just quiet. I know, she said, and her voice was softer now. You're the best listener I've ever met. You just sit there and let people be. You don't try to solve anything. My heart did a strange, unfamiliar thump against my ribs. We were just sitting there, cross-legged on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the smell of curry and the dim city lights filtering through the window. She didn't look away. And before my brain could veto the impulse, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "What would you do if I kissed you right now?" There was a beat of silence, a tiny eternity where the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then she gave that small, real smile again. She leaned forward, not aggressively, but with a quiet invitation, closing the small space between us until I could feel the warmth of her breath. "Find out," she whispered. So I did. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-perfect kiss. It was hesitant and soft, a question and an answer all at once. Her lips were gentle, and for a moment there was a sense of profound rightness, of two quiet people finding a shared language. But I could also feel a deep sadness in it, a guardedness that spoke of past hurts, a reluctance to fully let go. When we finally pulled apart, she just looked at me, her green eyes searching my face for something I couldn't name. I had no words, I just met her gaze. After a long moment, she breathed, "I haven't done that in a long time." "Me neither," I admitted, my voice hoarse. She stood up abruptly, breaking the spell. I should get ready for bed." I just nodded, my mind reeling. We didn't touch again. We didn't say anything else. She went into the bathroom, and I stayed on the floor, wondering if I had just made the most terrifying mistake or the most important decision of my life. The morning after the kiss, I woke up before my alarm, a nervous energy buzzing under my skin. For the first time in a long while, my chest felt expansive, like something was making room inside it instead of pressing down. I wondered if that kiss meant something, or if I had just shattered the fragile peace we'd built. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of her waking up. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, I was already in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in making coffee. I looked up and managed a small "Morning." But something was wrong. She didn't meet my eyes. There was no gentle smile, no shared glance, just a quick, clipped "Morning" as she moved past me to grab her things. The air between us was thick with a new kind of silence, a heavy, awkward one. When I handed her a mug of coffee, our fingers brushed, and she pulled her hand back as if she'd touched a hot stove. She turned away to focus on packing the last of her belongings into a duffel bag. Her landlord had called late last night. The apartment was ready. She was leaving today. I stood there, mug in hand, my heart sinking with a slow, painful finality. All morning, as she packed, I mentally cycled through a list of possible explanations. Maybe she was just stressed about moving back in. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she hadn't slept well. But by the time she was zipping up her bag, a colder truth began to settle in my gut. She regretted it. I didn't want to accept it. That kiss had felt like the most honest thing I had experienced in years. It wasn't just physical. It felt like a connection, a quiet understanding. And I was so sure she had felt it too. But the way she moved around me now, with a deliberate, careful distance, that was the posture of someone rebuilding a wall, brick by brick. I couldn't let her leave like this. Just before she was about to walk out the door, I finally found my voice. "Leah, wait." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. "Can we talk for a minute?" She hesitated for a long moment. I really need to go, Caleb. The movers are coming with my storage unit stuff. I'll walk with you, I said, my heart pounding. I just needed to understand. We walked the few blocks to the bus stop in a tense silence, the city's morning bustle a stark contrast to the quiet between us. Finally, I had to ask, "Did I do something wrong last night?" She stopped walking and finally looked at me, her eyes tired. She blinked slowly. "No, you didn't do anything wrong. Then why are you acting like this?" She let out a long, shaky breath and looked down at the sidewalk. "I'm not avoiding you," she said, her voice so low I could barely hear it. "I'm protecting myself." I frowned, confused. "From me?" She shook her head, a flicker of frustration in her eyes. From what this could turn into. There was a long pause. "I liked the kiss," she said, the admission sounding like it was physically painful for her to make. Probably more than I should have, and that terrifies me. "Why?" I asked, my own voice quiet. "Because my life is a chaotic mess right now, Caleb. I have a daughter. I have an ex who is a constant, complicated presence. I've just been through this housing nightmare. I don't have the emotional bandwidth for feelings that make me feel unsteady." I looked down, the words I wanted to say catching in my throat. Everything I could think of sounded hollow or selfish. She stepped a little closer. "When I said you're different, that's the problem. You're quiet and you're kind and you don't ask for anything. And that makes me want to lean on you, and I can't afford to lean on anyone right now." I finally managed to speak. "I'm not asking for anything complicated. I liked having you around. And that's exactly why I'm scared," she whispered, her eyes glistening. The bus was approaching, its brakes hissing as it neared the stop. The silence that fell between us wasn't angry. It was heavy with unspoken things, with the weight of bad timing and old wounds. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Okay," I said. "I get it. I don't like it, but I get it." She looked surprised, as if she'd been expecting an argument. "You're not going to try to convince me?" I offered a sad half-smile. "I've never been good at arguing, especially not when I know the other person is hurting." A flicker of warmth returned to her eyes. "You're a good man, Caleb." I stood up straighter. "Yeah, well, it's a low bar." The bus doors opened. "Take care of yourself, Leah." "You too." She gave me a small, tired nod, then turned and got on the bus without looking back. I stood there on the sidewalk long after it pulled away, the space beside me feeling vast and empty. That night, sleep was impossible, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than before. It wasn't anticipation. It was a hollow ache, a profound sense of loss. I didn't feel rejected, not exactly. I felt like a door had been opened just a crack, showing me a life I hadn't known I wanted, only to be gently but firmly closed in my face. Over the next few weeks, the silence in my apartment returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was empty. I'd walk into the kitchen expecting to see her mug on the counter and feel a fresh pang of disappointment when it wasn't there. I kept thinking I heard her moving around in the other room, only to remember I was alone. I didn't want to be the guy who couldn't respect a boundary. Not now, was clear. It meant give her space. And the last thing I wanted to be was another man in her life who pushed. So I didn't call. I didn't text. I tried to fall back into my old rhythm, but the shape of my life felt wrong now, like a favorite sweater that had been stretched out of place. I still thought about her every day. I wondered how the move back into her apartment went. I wondered if Chloe was back from her dad's yet. I wondered if she ever thought about me. One night, after a particularly quiet day, I opened my phone and typed out a message. Every word felt true. "I'm still here if you ever change your mind. I'm not going anywhere." I stared at the text, my thumb hovering over the send button. Then, with a sigh, I saved it to my drafts and closed the phone. Sometimes, the most difficult part of wanting something isn't the rejection. It's the waiting. It had been 26 days since Leah walked out of my apartment and onto that bus. I wasn't trying to keep a running count, but my mind did it for me anyway. Each morning I woke up in my empty bed was another tally mark. Every time I made a single cup of coffee, I was reminded of the weeks I'd made 2. I hadn't heard a word from her since that day. I'd honored my unspoken promise to give her the space she needed. No calls, no texts from my drafts folder, no accidentally running into her. But her presence lingered in my quiet life like a phantom limb. I thought about the sound of her laugh, the concentrated frown she got when she was reading, the way she'd tuck a stray piece of hair behind her ear. I missed her, but it was more than that. I missed the feeling of being seen by someone who didn't need me to be anyone other than who I was. I missed not being alone. Then, on a Wednesday evening, something changed. I'd just gotten home from work, the sky outside a bruised purple. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, made a sandwich I had no appetite for, and was sitting on my couch, staring blankly at the television. I wasn't really watching when I heard a soft knock at my door. Not a loud, insistent rap, but a quiet, hesitant tapping. I frowned, muted the TV, and went to the door. When I opened it, she was standing there. Leah. For a second, I wasn't sure I was seeing her correctly. She was holding a worn copy of a book, one of mine, a history of the city I'd left on the coffee table. You left this," she said, her voice a little shaky as she held it out to me. Her hair was down, and she looked tired, but she was there. I took the book from her, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. My heart, which had been dormant for weeks, gave a powerful lurch. "I could have mailed it," she added quickly. I was in the neighborhood." I knew she wasn't. Her school and apartment were clear across town. "Do you want to come in?" I asked, my voice rusty. She hesitated, biting her lip, then gave a small nod. She stepped inside, and the apartment immediately felt different, less empty. She stood awkwardly in the entryway, clutching her purse strap. "I have your tea," I said, the words tumbling out before I could think. "The kind you like. I bought some after you left." A flicker of something. Surprise? Warmth? Crossed her face. "I can make you a cup, if you want to talk." She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw the exhaustion and the uncertainty warring in her eyes. "I'll be at the park," she said softly. "The one with the rose garden on Sunday. Around 6. If you still want to talk, then." She didn't wait for an answer. She just gave me one last, searching look, and then she was gone, leaving me standing in my doorway with a book in my hand and a fragile, terrifying bud of hope blooming in my chest. The next few days were an exercise in controlled anxiety. I was useless at work. I misfiled a whole decade's worth of city council minutes, nearly deleted a crucial digital archive, and spent most of my time staring out the window, replaying our 30-second interaction at my door. By the time Sunday arrived, I was a bundle of raw nerves. I got to the park 20 minutes early. The bench she must have meant was easy to find, set under a large oak tree overlooking a bed of late-blooming roses. It was old, the green paint peeling, slightly weathered from years of exposure. I sat down, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, my leg bouncing with a nervous energy I couldn't contain. 6 o'clock arrived. Then 6:02. 6:05. I started to feel a familiar dread creeping in. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe this was a mistake. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. I turned my head, and there she was. Leah. She wore an old, soft-looking hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back. She was carrying a small thermos and a paper bag. She looked exactly as I remembered her, and yet somehow different, more real out here in the world than she had in the confines of my apartment. She walked over, sat down next to me without a word, and held out the thermos. "I brought tea," she said, her voice quiet. "It's probably lukewarm." I smiled. "I don't mind." I took the cup she offered and took a sip. It was perfect. For a long minute we just sat there, the silence stretching between us. But it felt like a warm blanket this time, not a wall. Finally, she was the one to speak. "I almost didn't come." I looked over at her. "Why did you?" She sighed, a long, slow release of breath. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, before I left." "What did I say?" I asked, genuinely unsure. "You said you just liked having me around. That's all. No expectations, no pressure." I nodded slowly. She looked out at the path, watching a family walk by. "Everyone in my life for the last few years has wanted something from me. My ex wants to be absolved of his guilt. My parents want me to be the person I was before the divorce. People see me as this broken thing they need to fix or save. You never did that. You just listened. That's all I ever wanted to do," I said honestly. She finally turned to face me. "My ex is pushing for more time with Chloe. He's sober again," he says, "and he's trying to be a better father." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "It's a good thing for Chloe," she continued, "but it's hard. It brings up so much. And then you were there, and I felt something real, and it completely terrified me." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Leah, the last thing I ever wanted was to make your life more complicated." "I know," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "And that's what makes you different." Another comfortable silence fell. She reached into the paper bag she'd brought and pulled out 2 slightly misshapen chocolate chip cookies. She handed one to me. We ate them without speaking. They were a little stale, but they were good. Then she asked, her voice soft, "Do you still think about that night?" "All the time," I admitted without hesitation. She held my gaze. "And if I told you I wasn't ready for anything serious, but I wanted to start over? Just a little slower this time. Would that be okay?" I turned to her fully on the bench. "Are we talking coffee slow or park bench slow?" She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Somewhere in between," she said. I felt a grin spread across my own face. "Yeah," I said. "That's okay." We sat on that bench until the sun began to dip below the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. We weren't 2 people rushing toward a conclusion. We were 2 people quietly agreeing that this, whatever it was, mattered enough to try. When we finally stood up to leave, she didn't say a formal goodbye. She just looked at me, her expression open and hopeful, and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." "Same time?" I asked. She nodded. "Same time." She walked away toward the parking lot, and I stayed for a minute longer, finishing my tea and looking at the empty bench. For the first time in a month, I didn't feel stuck in the past. I felt like we were at a beginning, a slow, honest, and shared beginning. It's been 10 months since that afternoon on the park bench. I can recall every detail of it, the warmth of the lukewarm tea in my hands, the scent of the roses, the look in her eyes when she said, "Somewhere in between." That moment wasn't a dramatic declaration of love. It was quieter and far more important. It was permission to begin again, without pressure. And we didn't rush. That was the most important part. We let things unfold naturally. We texted. We called. I started seeing her for coffee, not as a silent admirer, but as a friend. We'd meet for walks along the water. She'd tell me about her day, and I'd tell her about mine. In early April, I finally met Chloe. She was a tiny, brilliant storm of energy, just as Leah had described, full of questions about the Jurassic period and strong opinions about glitter. I was terrified I'd say the wrong thing, but Leah made it feel easy. I wasn't trying to be a father figure. I was just Caleb, the guy who knew a lot about old Tacoma and could fix her broken tablet. We started weaving our lives together in small, simple ways. Picnics at the park on sunny Saturdays, trips to the farmer's market, movie nights at her apartment where the three of us would pile onto the couch with a giant bowl of popcorn. Most times Chloe would be asleep between us before the second act, and Leah and I would just sit there in the quiet glow of the screen, her head resting on my shoulder, a comfortable silence settling over us. We avoided putting a label on what we were for a long time. It wasn't because we didn't know what it was, but because giving it a name felt like it would make it fragile, like something that could be broken by speaking it aloud. She still had her difficult days. Sometimes the weight of her past would press down on her, and she'd grow quiet and distant. Once I came over to find her sitting on her bedroom floor, just staring at a photo of Chloe as a toddler. She didn't say much, just whispered, "I really thought my life would look so different by now." I didn't offer solutions or platitudes. I just sat down on the floor beside her until she was ready to get up. Later that night, she leaned her head against my chest and said, "You make it easier to breathe." That was the moment I knew, with a calm certainty, that I was in love with her. It wasn't a dizzying, dramatic realization. It was a quiet, solid fact, an earned truth that had been building with every conversation, every shared silence, every day I chose to show up. In July, the Historical Society had to make budget cuts, and as one of the newer archivists, I was laid off. The blow was staggering, not just financially, but to my sense of self. I felt adrift, like I had nothing stable to offer her. I retreated into myself, stopped answering texts for 2 days. On the third day, she showed up at my apartment, letting herself in with the key I'd given her. She stood in my living room with her arms crossed and said, "Don't you dare disappear on me, Caleb, not after all this." I told her I felt like a failure. She just shook her head. I felt like a failure the day I moved out of the house I shared with my husband. She said softly, "And yet, here we are. Neither of us is broken. We're just rebuilding." She sat with me all afternoon, helped me update my resume, and connected me with a friend who worked for the city's facilities department. I had a new job maintaining records within 2 weeks. It wasn't my passion, but it was steady, honest work. By the fall, our lives had found a beautiful, easy rhythm. Chloe started 2nd grade. I found a new apartment, still my own, but only a 5-minute walk from theirs. Some nights I'd cook dinner for them. Other nights we'd just walk downtown and browse the bookstore where I used to live, making up stories about the people on the covers. And somewhere in between the shared meals, the homework help, and the quiet evenings on her couch, Leah's smile changed. It wasn't the guarded, polite smile she gave the world anymore. It was softer, unguarded, and it reached all the way to her eyes. It was the smile of someone who had finally let her defenses down and found it was safe to do so. A month ago, over a quiet Sunday breakfast at her place, I brought it up. There was no grand gesture, no ring hidden in a pancake. She was spreading jam on a piece of toast for Chloe. I just said, "What would you think about maybe finding a place together? The 3 of us." She stopped, the knife hovering over the bread. She didn't answer right away. She finished making the toast, put it on a plate, and sat down at the table across from me. Then she looked at me, her expression serious and open. You're the first man I've ever trusted enough to even consider sharing a roof with again. A small smile bloomed on her face. So yes, let's find a place. We didn't make a big event out of it. We just started looking. We found a small 2-bedroom house for rent on a quiet street, with a big backyard for Chloe and a kitchen with atrocious green countertops. But she loved the light that came through the windows, so I loved it too. Today is our first morning in the new house. Chloe is still asleep in her new room, surrounded by boxes of books and stuffed animals. Leah is curled up on the new couch in one of my old sweatshirts, reading a book, her feet tucked up under her. The whole house smells like fresh paint and the coffee I just brewed. I sit down beside her, and she leans against me without a word. We don't need to fill the silence anymore. We just exist in it, together. After a few minutes, I say softly, "Do you remember the first thing I ever said to you about sharing a bed?" She smiles without looking up from her book. "You told me to stay on my side." She closes her book, sets it aside, and turns to face me, her eyes soft and full of a light that I know is just for me. "I'm not very good at that anymore," she says. I grin. "I've noticed." She puts her hand on my cheek, a touch warm and familiar. "More than ever," she whispers, and then I kiss her. It's different now than it was that first time on my living room floor. There's no hesitation, no sadness, no uncertainty. It's just us. It's just right. When we pull away, she rests her forehead against mine. "Thank you for waiting," she whispers. "Thank you for being so patient with me." I shake my head. "You were never something to be fixed, Leah. I think I was the one who needed something. I just needed to find someone who made me believe I was worth showing up for." She holds my gaze, her eyes unwavering. "You were," she says, "from the very beginning." And that's our story. It didn't start with a spark. It started with a burst pipe and a quiet agreement. It wasn't a whirlwind. It was two people, carrying their own scars and their own histories, who chose to build something real. We built it slowly, carefully, brick by brick, breath by breath. And now, this is the house we live in.